Welcome to the deep dive. We unpack fascinating sources to give you, well, a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Mhm.
Today we're tackling something really fundamental. Power, governance, how societies get shaped.
It's huge.
Yeah, we've got ancient philosophy, modern politics, global dynamics, even how we study it all. It's quite a spread. Our mission, distill the key insights for you.
And what's fascinating, truly, is seeing the connections, how Plato's debates echo in modern international relations. They're all wrestling with these core questions.
So like how we organize ourselves, how power works.
Exactly. Timeless challenges showing up in surprising ways across history. We'll try and connect those dots.
Okay, let's dive in, starting right at the beginning. Ancient political philosophy.
Makes sense.
When we think politics, we often think laws. But the ancients, well, they debated something deeper, the best way to rule.
Right.
Take Plato. His Republic gives us this vision of an ideal city. Laws are key, and the speakers are like its founders.
Yes, it sets a standard. But then things get more complex. In his later work, The Statesman, he throws out this really critical question.
Which is,
Is rule by law really better than rule by, say, an expert? Someone with deep knowledge, maybe just one person.
the philosopher king idea almost.
Sort of. The Statesman even calls law an imperfect substitute for that kind of flexible expertise.
Wow. So he saw law as potentially too rigid.
Exactly. It's this ancient debate that, feels very current. Think about how rigid laws sometimes struggle with complex, fast-changing problems today.
That tension between stability and needing to adapt.
Precisely. A timeless tension.
So did Plato just ditch law then? Why bring it up if it's imperfect?
Well, that's the interesting twist. The Statesman critiques law, sure, but it also concludes something crucial.
Okay.
If your choice is between some ignorant person just changing laws on a whim versus a state bound by existing laws, well, the law-bound state is definitely better.
Got it. So law snaps back into importance as a safeguard against, arbitrary power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It prevents the worst case, even if it's not the ideal case. It highlights that dilemma. How do you get good judgment without risking tyranny?
Which really begs the question, what is justice anyway if even laws aren't perfect?
The ancients didn't all agree, did they?
Not at all. You had quite varied views, though often connected. Take the Epicureans. Epicurus, their founder in Athens.
Right.
For them, politics wasn't, the ultimate path to a good life. Its value was instrumental, practical.
How so?
Epicurus had this contractarian view of justice. Basically, it's an agreement we make for mutual protection, to avoid harming each other. It echoes some earlier sophist ideas.
So justice serves utility, usefulness.
Precisely. Epicurus actually said, if someone makes a law and it does not happen to accord with the utility of social relationships, it no longer has the nature of justice.
That's pretty clear cut.
Yeah, the ultimate utility for them. Tranquility,
Yeah.
security, peace of mind. Now, an individual Epicurean might be just for their own peace of mind.
But they still thought laws were needed to make sure everyone else behaved for general security.
Okay, so even these guys seeking personal calm saw the need for collective rules. When you pull back, it does seem like lots of Greek and Roman thinkers agreed on some basics.
Like what?
Like, collaborative deliberation among equals for the sake of the good life. That idea. The city, the civic bond, justice being central. Even the Epicureans fit that, sort of, with their utility view.
That's the common narrative, yeah. Almost a bit, nostalgic. But our sources warn us it's an oversimplification.
How so?
Because there were powerful critiques of justice, even back then. Remember Plato's characters? Thrasymachus saying politics is just domination.
Right, mixed brag.
Or Callicles attacking justice itself as bad for the individual, like it's a weakness. And then you had skeptics like Carneades.
So the debate was fierce. No easy consensus.
Absolutely not. They were arguing about the fundamental nature of power and justice from the very beginning.
And that skepticism, that debate, it certainly hasn't vanished. So let's pivot. How does all this play out in modern politics, especially democracies?
Right.
And the sources get really interesting here with the U.S. First Amendment and money in politics. Since Buckley v. Valeo back in '76,
A landmark case.
the Supreme Court set up this distinction, right? You can limit campaign contributions because of the risk of corruption, like a direct trade quid pro quo.
Yep, that direct exchange.
And this is the kicker, you can't limit expenditures. Spending money on politics is seen as free speech.
And that distinction has had huge consequences. Fast forward to 2010, Citizens United.
The really big one.
It overruled an earlier case, basically saying corporations have the same First Amendment rights to spend money on politics as individuals.
As long as it's not direct bribery. No corruption risk.
That was the argument, yeah. Because it's independent spending, not a direct contribution to a candidate.
Right.
This opened the door for massive spending, even by so-called shell corporations or C4s.
Of social welfare groups.
Right, which can spend unlimited amounts, often without disclosing donors. It's a real paradox, isn't it? Protecting free speech might inadvertently open floodgates for financial influence.
Yeah, who gets the loudest voice? That really lays bare the tension. And this tension of individual rights versus collective good or unchecked power, it pops up in regulation too.
Oh, absolutely. The sources point out that just designing regulations isn't purely technical.
Yeah.
Power, politics, ideology, they shape everything.
Even when regulation seems obvious.
Even then, you get these tricky problems like moral hazard. Remember the bank bailouts?
Yeah.
If taxpayers backstop risky banks.
It encourages more risk.
Potentially, yeah. Or look at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Relatively new agency, faced huge industry pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources say this lobbying helped create an administrative structure that was almost completely unworkable. One source called it a Rube Goldberg machine.
Wow, like deliberately designed to be complicated and ineffective.
It suggests that, yeah, the design itself becomes a political battleground.
Fascinating. And speaking of ideology and power shaping things, what about the broader political landscape? Especially in the U.S., there have been big shifts.
Definitely.
Like the anti-tax movement, the repeal of the estate tax. Probably the most progressive tax got bipartisan support. That shows a major shift.
It really does, and the sources trace this out. Ballot initiatives like Prop 13 in California, huge tax cuts passed easily.
Right, I remember that.
Candidates like George W. Bush ran on repealing the estate tax,
Hmm?
and then the 1994 Contract with America
Newt Gingrich.
tried to get a two-thirds vote requirement to raise taxes. That was a sea change, really cementing this anti-tax crusade.
And they were strategic about it, too.
Very. The estate tax repeal had a sunset clause. The cuts expired in 10 years unless Congress acted to extend them. They were banking on political inertia.
Clever, in a way. Doing nothing the default outcome they wanted. And this movement, it's part of broader changes, right? Coalitions shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen organized labor lose clout, more job insecurity, shitting middle-class incomes. And the material describes the Democratic Party starting to see itself as this patchwork of minorities, focusing on multiculturalism, a rainbow.
Which some felt left out white working-class voters.
Yeah, perception was there, yeah. It contrasts with Europe's multi-party systems, where you see anti-EU, anti-system parties doing better, leading to more fragmentation.
And in two-party systems like the U.S., the sources say we expect winter labor protections, less redistribution.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And weak parties, like we arguably have in the U.S., struggle to actually push their agendas. Think about the Republicans voting, 71 times to repeal Obamacare.
When they were in opposition.
Right. But couldn't do it when they had power. It shows a lack of internal cohesion or strong party discipline.
And sometimes leaders use referendums to avoid tough party decisions, like Cameron with Brexit.
Exactly. Or Thatcher back in '83. It could be a way to duck resolving conflict within your own party. Pass the buck to the voters.
Which highlights something else the sources mention. Moral narratives. They really matter in politics today.
Profoundly. Coalitions based only on shared interests. The sources say they're inherently unstable.
Why is that?
You need some kind of shared moral framework, a common story, to hold things together long term. They even cite this divide-a-dollar game.
A game theory thing.
Yeah, showing how coalitions can form in surprising ways, like rich and poor teaming up against the middle class, based on a shared narrative, not just pure economic interest.
Fascinating. It's the glue. Okay, let's zoom out now. Global stage. How do power and governance work between nations? What are the big ideas for world order?
Right, the sources lay out the major theories in international relations. Each gives you a different lens.
Start with the big one.
Realism.
Yeah.
Probably the most dominant. Views states as, well, self-interested, always trying to increase their power compared to others.
Survival first.
Pretty much. Self-preservation in an anarchical system.
Yeah.
No world government, right? So nobody can be trusted. It leads to self-help.
Don't rely on others. And morality.
Risky. Weakening. That's the realist view. Now, classical realism points to human nature. Structural realism, or neorealism, think Kenneth Waltz, points to the system, the anarchy itself.
And offensive realists.
They think states go further. They try to maximize power, which can lead to hegemonic threats. One state trying to dominate.
Okay, a pretty bleak view. What's the counter?
Liberalism traces back to Locke, Kant, emphasizes individual rights, peace between nations, trade, economic ties, building connections.
More optimistic.
Yeah. And neoliberal institutionalism, a more modern take, says even with anarchy, states can cooperate. They use international organizations, regimes.
Like the UN or trade agreements.
Exactly, to foster cooperation without giving up sovereignty.
Okay, so states versus institutions. What else? Theories beyond the state level.
Definitely. You've got Marxist theories. They see it all through an economic lens, capitalism driving everything.
How so?
Argue that wealthy capitalists basically created the state system to grow their wealth. Class struggle isn't just within states, it's international. Capitalism shapes global relations for profit.
Like dependency theory, world systems theory.
Those are key examples, yeah.
Yeah.
Looking at core versus periphery exploitation.
And another critical lens.
Feminist theory argues that international relations has historically been a man's world, dominated by masculine values, conflict, domination, anarchy.
And if women's experiences were central.
The theory suggests we'd see more focus on cooperation, rules, peace. It challenges the very foundations of how we've traditionally studied global politics.
Four very different ways of seeing the world. And these aren't just theories, they clash in real historical moments.
Absolutely. Think
Yeah.
about decolonization after World War II. Huge wave. India in '47. Namibia as late as 1990.
The birth of the Third World changed everything.
It did. But then you get neocolonialism. Political independence, yes, but continued economic exploitation, often through things like multinational corporations. Still external influence, just different tools.
Yeah, and the end of the Cold War. A new global order.
That was the hope. South Africa's transition in '94 was seen as a poster child for democracy. Mandela de Klerk, a successful negotiated transition.
What's interesting there, you mentioned business leaders played a role.
Yeah, the sources highlight this. They saw apartheid was unsustainable, economically damaging, and they wanted to influence the ANC's economic thinking.
Because the ANC leaders learned economics where?
Some learned from Das Kapital in East European guerrilla training camps. So business had an interest in, let's say, moderating that view.
Fascinating background. And Buthelezzi's Inkatha could have spoiled it?
Huge potential spoiler. Could have started a civil war in Natal province, but ultimately the transition held.
But that hopeful moment wasn't universal. Events like Rwanda, Kosovo, they led to new ideas about intervention.
Yes, the idea of responsibility to protect, R2P. A sense that the international community had a duty to act in extreme cases.
But Kosovo was controversial. NATO acted without UN approval.
Exactly. No NATO country was directly threatened. It drew condemnation, especially from the non-aligned movement, countries like South Africa, India. They saw it as a flagrant violation of international norms. Sovereignty versus humanitarianism, a huge clash.
And that tension just exploded after 9/11.
Oh, completely. The Bush Doctrine, asserting a right to strike anywhere for U.S. security, worldwide scope.
A big shift from the earlier Powell Doctrine.
Totally repudiated it. Powell Doctrine was about overwhelming force, clear objectives, exit strategies. Bush Doctrine was much more expansive, preemptive.
But interventions didn't always go well.
Far from it. Botched operations like Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down. Abuses like Abu Ghraib. They showed the huge costs, the unintended consequences, especially when fighting on the cheap or backing losers in civil wars like Afghanistan, Libya.
And the sources say outside involvement often makes civil wars longer.
That's a key point they make. It often prolongs the conflict. So, in reaction to all this, the idea of containment started to look more appealing again, a more cautious approach.
No easy answers there at all. So, shifting to today's rising powers, China in Africa, how does that fit this picture?
It's a really interesting case study. China's presence is seen as being for the longer future, not just quick resource grabs.
Investments are diverse.
Very. Construction, transport, manufacturing. And officially, they have this 5 no's policy.
Meaning?
No interference, no strings attached, no selfish political gains. That's the official line.
But the critics see it differently.
Yeah, some call it new colonialism, just a different flavor. The sources urge African governments to be savvy, use their bargaining power, negotiate stronger deals, learn from China's own development strategies.
So it's complex. Stated intentions versus perceived impact, plus strategic negotiation.
Exactly. It's not simple aid, it's a multi-layered relationship.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground. Ancient ideas, modern states, global conflict, but underlying all of it is, how do we know this stuff? How do we study politics?
Right, the sources even get into the discipline itself, political science. What lenses do researchers use?
It's not all just one approach.
Definitely not. You can broadly divide it. First, there's positivism. Thinks you can study politics like a natural science.
Objective, value-free.
That's the aim. Emphasizes observation, precise quantitative data. Experiments, surveys, statistics, its main activity. One source says it's counting. Finding measurable facts, objective truths.
Okay, very scientific method-focused. What's the alternative?
Well, postpositivism reacted against that strict empiricism. It focuses more on interpretation, explaining why things are the way they are.
Acknowledging researcher bias.
Exactly. Recognizes that values are involved.
They trove.
Tries to understand things in their specific social, historical context. More nuance.
And then there are approaches that are openly value-driven.
Right. Critical approaches, things like feminist research, empowerment research, they overtly act in a value-laden and biased fashion.
Biased.
In the sense that their goal isn't just understanding, it's helping people change things. Addressing oppression, power imbalances. Social transformation is part of the goal.
Got it. And within these big approaches, researchers use specific methods, right?
Yep. Qualitative research is one type. Often involves thick description.
Meaning?
Really getting deep into meaning. Using personal interviews, focus groups, analyzing archives. The research design might even evolve as you go.
Like case studies.
Case studies are a big one. Can be instrumental, use the case to understand a bigger issue, or intrinsic, understand that specific case in depth. Ethnography is another, describing a culture or group, interpreting their behavior.
And the other side?
Quantitative research, more focused on numbers. Questionnaires are common for description, using statistical tools, t-tests, and AVIA to compare groups. Correlation, regression, to find relationships between variables, see how strong they are.
So lots of different tools for different kinds of questions. What does this mean for you, our listener, trying to make sense of it all?
I think it reminds us that studying politics isn't just fact collecting. It's about interpretation, context. Different questions need different methods.
For example?
A researcher might compare voter reactions in California versus Nebraska to farm policy. That's quantitative comparison. Or they might study how different ethnic groups feel about welfare reform. Maybe qualitative interviews, or how EU adults vote after the Euro quantitative analysis over time.
Different lenses for different parts of the puzzle.
Exactly. But they all add to our understanding of this complex political world and these, well, enduring questions about power.
We really have covered a lot. Ancient debates, modern democracies, global shifts, even how we study it. It's clear these questions about power, justice, good governance, they just don't go away.
You really don't.
Yeah.
And maybe the real deep dive, connecting it all, isn't finding the single answer. Maybe it's recognizing that power itself is persistent. It's multifaceted.
And we need different ways to look at it.
Yeah, being willing to use diverse methods, diverse perspectives, understanding the nature of the challenge might be more important than finding one elusive solution.
So next time you see a headline, political fight, new policy, maybe pause and think. What ancient question is echoing here? What power dynamics are really underneath? And what lens, what theory or method might help you understand it better? We hope this deep dive helps you start asking those questions.